Camiel. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
And would you like to tell our audience what you do at the Trans Clinic in Amsterdam?
Of course. My name is Camiel Welling. I live in Amsterdam. I'm a medical doctor and I'm the medical supervisor of the Trans Clinic, which is a clinic where we provide hormone support, sexual health support, and psychosocial support for the trans community. And aside being a medical doctor and prescribing hormones, I'm also specializing to be a sexologist. So that's all about sexual health, sexual pleasure, sexual life.
That's great, because usually when it comes to hormone therapy for transgender people, we always focus so much on the body, but the sexuality is such an important part of our life, and we do not focus as much on sexuality. So
No, true. I think there's still a lot of shame speaking about being sexually active. Giving sexual education can be still something that we don't talk about. But hormones have a big impact on us. It has impact, as you say, on our physical bodies, the effects on our body, but also on our emotions, but also on our sexual life and on our reproduction. And it's important to, if you help someone with hormone support, that you discuss the full picture and not just what it does to the body, but also the emotions, sexual life, and reproduction.
So, can you explain to our audience, how does hormone replacement therapy affect our sexual life?
So I think the important thing for hormone therapy for trans women, but also trans feminine people and non-binary people that want to start feminizing hormones, that aside from all the effects on the body and what that does about how you feel about your body and how you feel as a person and how you feel as a sexual being, hormones itself have impact on your life, on your sexual life, on how your body functions. So when I explain people what it does to your body, the first thing that I always speak about is about desire. What it does to your daily desire. Usually, when you're born with a body that has testosterone and masculine anatomy, you're used to feeling desire because, for example, you wake up with erection, those kind of markers. We don't feel them anywhere else in our body, but they remind us like, oh, we're turned on. As soon as you start taking feminine hormones, erections happen maybe a bit less often. So we less often get that reminder like, oh, you're turned on. For women that have had vaginoplasty, but also for cisgender women, the only way of realizing that you're turned on is maybe by way more subtle things of the body. So for cis women, it's, for example, lubrication. That is something that you realize, oh, I'm turned on, I'm able to have sex. But that's not something that you notice straight away. Yeah. So erections are something that are very noticeable and tell us, oh, we're turned on. But if we start taking hormones and we get less often erections, we don't have that reminder that we're turned on. So we feel maybe that we're less turned on, even though our body might think, oh, this is a nice thing to do, or this is a nice path to go down. But your awareness of your desire becomes less. So you're less often aware, oh, I'm turned on. You need to more actively think about, do I want to have sex? Do I want to go down this path of sexual adventure with, for example, your partner or someone that you're sexually active with? So desire changes. So even though a lot of times people speak about libido and how men or people with masculine hormones are turned on a lot and women or people with female hormones are not turned on often, that is actually just because that difference of, do you have a little alarm bell telling you you're turned on? So that erection that becomes less frequent, that is actually that alarm bell telling you that you're turned on. And if you don't have that anymore, you might think, oh, I'm not turned on anymore. But that's really not how desire works. Desire is a very slow process. So how your body starts getting ready, you don't just need to have the physical happening of your body being ready. Also, your mind needs to be ready. And if you've always been used to having an erection as a reminder, oh, you're ready for having sex, but suddenly that erection doesn't happen anymore, then it can be quite difficult. So taking your time to think, oh, I might need a bit longer to get into the mood. I might need a little longer for arousal, for being ready for sex. That is something that is for all women, cis women, trans women, something that they need to be aware of.
Yeah. And is there any other, like we all know that along with the erection, erection is a very strong marker, but for trans women, sometimes that either due to HRT or due to surgery, it does not happen.
Yes.
But does that mean, but that does not mean we do not have desire.
Yes.
Is there any other markers in our body or mind that can help us, pinpoint or recognize, okay, I am getting aroused. There is my desire to have sex.
I think that is the big difference actually in anatomy. The fact that someone gets an erection and that is such a visible and like palpable sensation for the person who has it, you think like, oh, I must be turned on, even though sometimes an erection also happens when you're not turned on.
Yeah.
Like morning erections have nothing to do with desire, but it's just with blood flow, with hormone levels. But we link it automatically to the idea of being turned on. Whereas that is not really how the body works. So the fact that someone who has a penis, if that person has an erection, doesn't always mean that that person is aroused. But sometimes because they have an erection, they think, oh, I'm aroused, so I should have sex.
I should waste an erection.
Exactly. Why waste it? But on the other way around, for a lot of women, cis women, trans women, feminine people, it can be more complicated if you don't have that erection marker. When it comes to desire, sometimes desire is just a feeling within yourself. But we sometimes in our thinking want to go too quickly to the end goal. Like, oh, do I want to have sex right now? Whereas maybe it starts first with thinking, do I want to be intimate with someone? Do I want to be close with someone? Do I want to kiss with someone? And it's those kind of feelings that slowly build up to a feeling where the feelings become more intense and build up to sensuality, to sexuality, to sexual activity. So a lot of times when we focus on the end goal, it can be difficult to realize, what do I want? It can be difficult to realize what my partner wants. And sometimes sex isn't that enjoyable if you just focus on that end goal. Yeah. It should be more about a journey together and enjoying that and making it pleasurable for both of you. But when you are used to having a penis and having erections, it can be sometimes difficult to find that new path, because having an erection was a very good marker of, oh, can I have sex now? Yes or no? Do I want to have sex now? Yes or no? In the end, having sex with a penis is not the only possible sex. So sex is not only about orgasming or having penetration and orgasming, etc. So I think for you to realize each person has a different definition of what sex is. And a lot of times our definitions, because we don't talk that openly, is about that end goal, about that orgasming. But actually sex is a lovely dance together where you do a lot of steps and a lot of movements. And all of them are part of that dance, not just the grand finale where you bow and the whole audience applauds. It should be about the whole dance and not the finale. Yeah. So for you to keep in mind that your thoughts have a big influence, and it's not about the end goal, but all those little steps.
Yeah. Okay, now we recognize our desire. Now, once we are in the act of having sex or getting intimate with someone, does HRT make it any difficult to, or make it any harder to reach a climax, orgasm?
Yes, it does make it harder because it makes it not harder.
Mm.
That is a trick
Okay.
way of saying it.
Okay.
It is more difficult to get an erection, and if you get an erection, it's more difficult to have a harder erection. So that's the not harder part. So first of all, of course, depending on how you want to have sex and whether you need erection for that, that depends on each person. Not every person wants to have sex with an erection. Not every person wants to have future vaginoplasty. So everyone has a different way of experiencing their sexuality, and a penis and an erection can be a part of it. But of course, for your orgasm, you need the sensitive part of skin that causes an orgasm. And when you are born with a penis, then that sensitive skin is the tip of the penis. That is the part that is the most sensitive and the part that causes orgasm in the end. But when you have less often erections and less hard erections and less blood flow, it can become less sensitive. So a lot of people say that it can take a bit longer to get an orgasm, or that it takes longer to reach that end goal. A lot of trans women, first of all, I have to say the research on orgasms and sex in general is already a bit smaller compared with all the medical research. But then especially when it comes to sexual lives of trans people and gender diverse people, it's very, very small. The majority of research is just experience reports from people, so questionnaires, and where they tell about their experience. And what a lot of trans women report is that the time from being aroused to getting an orgasm increases once you start hormones. So maybe in the beginning it took a few minutes, if you want, from being aroused to an orgasm. And once you start hormones, it can take about 7 to 10 minutes longer to reach the orgasm. So it's not impossible to get an orgasm, it just takes longer. That is similar as what we see with cis people, cisgender people, where also the woman, the cisgender woman, takes a bit longer before she reaches that point of orgasm. The good news, because for a lot of people this sounds like bad news, like, oh, I have to wait longer. The good news is that the same as that for cisgender men, the orgasm is relatively short, about 3 to 10 seconds. And for cisgender women, the orgasm is a bit longer, about like 20 to 35 seconds. You see that once you start on hormones, orgasm can also increase and start to feel different. It means that it might not peak as much as it used to be with that very short orgasm, but it can last longer, the same as with cisgender women. So there is a change in orgasm. So the extra 7 minutes do build up to something new.
Okay, that's interesting. At least we get something bigger than longer for waiting. In Hindi, we have a saying, "Sabar ka phal meetha hota hai." When you have to wait long for a fruit, it's a tasty fruit.
That's a beautiful saying.
So, okay, so I think you answered partly the question, if the orgasm will be different.
Yes, so what I already mentioned, the duration can change, but also the strength of it. So the intensity of orgasm can change a little bit. And on top of that, for a lot of people, it might be the same as that skin becomes a bit more sensitive, the skin becomes a bit more soft. Your body can have different points of pleasure that feel different now. So that awareness of your body can change. And in the end, sex is not just an activity of your genitals, it is a full body workout and a full body experience. So those sensations, but also the thoughts that come with it, the thoughts that come with how you feel in your body, how you feel with your partner. And that has a big influence on how you experience sex and how you experience orgasm. So if you imagine still being very insecure about your body and having a lot of body doubts, that also makes it more difficult to relax. That makes it more difficult to feel secure with a partner. Whereas if you have a partner that is very accepting of your body and very much celebrating and taking the time for you to enjoy yourself, that can feel very different. It makes it easier to relax. It makes it easier to be in the moment. So if it is difficult for you to be sexually active and to relax, don't feel like, oh, this is all due to the hormones or due to steps that I take in my transition. It could also be your state of mind, where it can be very scary to be intimate with someone. It can be very scary for yourself to be connected with your body, because maybe in the past you didn't like your body and you were quite resistant to how you felt with your body before hormones. So getting connected and feeling at home with your body is also a journey. And all those different elements, the emotions and the physical elements, they all come together within sexual activity and with orgasm. So it's not only what hormones do and what hormones have for an effect on erection and orgasm, but also your state of mind. So that also means that if there are still things that you're not happy with, or that you maybe feel ashamed about or feel uncertain about, there is still a lot of things that you can work on with yourself or with a loved one that you feel close with or feel intimate with, to work about loving yourself and enjoying the sexual being that you also are, aside from everything else that you are.
So it's about being comfortable with the person you are. And also, orgasm is a more full body experience. And
yes, it is. Sex is so diverse, which is, I mean, we can talk forever about it. But on the one hand, there is this feeling of feeling comfortable with your body and going with that flow of sexuality. So feeling free to go down the river of whatever is happening. On the other hand, we also know there needs to be some sort of adventure or excitement to turn us excited, to turn us on. Yes. So the same as that, it should be safe, but it should not be boring. There should be some tension, and there could be. So that makes sexuality something that for so many people is a big question mark, sometimes scary to talk about, and then especially when it comes to sex for gender diverse people, for trans people, they already experience that they're being sexualized a lot. So then having these questions, sometimes people just choose, oh, let me just not have sex for now because it's too overwhelming. I think to be aware that shame and avoidance around sex happens on all levels, on all ages, on all genders, on all backgrounds. So it's very common for people not to talk about it. And some people are fine with that. But if you feel like, oh, there is something there that I actually want to address and I want to experience this fuller part of myself and also be okay with my sexual self, there's absolutely options to find how you can enjoy sex better.
Okay. And I also want to go back to the previous question that we talked about being harder to attain an erection or taking longer to erect. So is there also other factors of playing a role there, or if it is someone very young, do they also feel, because
Good question. You will see that over life, for cis men and people with masculine anatomy, their testosterone levels, especially in their 20s and 30s, are at their peak, so to say.
We call it charti javani.
What does that mean? That's the peak
uphill youth.
Okay, yeah, exactly. After that point, the level of testosterone can be in general a bit lower, so you will see that sometimes people have difficulties getting an erection. However, every human body is very different. So some people already have at a very young age. So when they're in their teenage years, difficulties with erections. Some people only get when they are 80 years old, they get difficulties with erections. Some people never get difficulties with erections. And that is because there's also so many have an influence on getting an erection, because it could be something physiological, so your hormones, for example, or something with blood flow, but it could also be something emotional, something about fear, or about fear of orgasming too quickly, or about fear of being judged, fear about being different. And that's also why sexology as a specialization is a combination of the medical field and of the psychological. Especially sex doesn't have just a medical background, it doesn't just have an emotional background, it has the combination of the two. So I think for any person that starts with HRT, realizing that it will very likely influence erections, as in it will be more difficult to get erections, and it will be more difficult to get harder erections, and therefore also takes longer to get an orgasm. That doesn't mean that sex can't be enjoyable. And for every person, it's different whether an erection has a role in sex. Some people are saying, well, the fact that I identify as a woman doesn't mean that I have to get rid of my penis. For some people, their erection can still be part of their femininity and of their sexual life. And for other people, it's like, well, no, I'm very happy that I don't have erections anymore. I'm very happy that that fully stopped since I started taking hormones. And there's not one way that is right. No, okay, if you don't want to have erections, there is ways of hormone support that have stronger influence on erections, that you don't have them anymore. But there's also ways of having hormone support that makes it easier to still keep your erection, because there's different ways of your transitional paths.
And what are those different options?
I think the most important is the difference between whether you just use an estrogen product or whether you also use blockers. Testosterone is the most important factor in regulating erections, so to say, and also the production of sperm and the ejaculation. And with a blocker, your testosterone goes down, and you see that the blocker usually has a stronger effect on erections going down, less sperm being produced, less fluid coming out, and all those factors impact the feeling of orgasm.
And is there a difference between different kinds of blockers as well on the erection, like gonadotropin regulating hormones or spironol?
I'm not sure if there's scientific evidence on that. And in every different region of the world, there is different standard treatments. So, for example, in the Netherlands, our main blockers are either injectable blockers that are long lasting. So they either last for a month or for 3 months, but they have quite a strong effect on your testosterone becoming undetectable. So we notice it's like a sexual nuclear bomb. It takes it takes a while before the body realizes it can still function. There's also pill form Androcure, which can have negative side effects if people use it for their lifetime, for a long time. So spironolactone, for example, is not one of the common blockers in the Netherlands. I think because there's regional differences or intercontinental differences, I'm not sure which blocker would be the most recommended, but I always tell people that it is good to be aware that certain treatments have more impact on erections. So some women tell me then I rather stick with estrogen and maybe build up those dosages to levels that have the most feminizing effect. But at least my testosterone is sufficient to continue having erections. And other women tell me oh no, please give me the blocker, because just the idea of erections makes me feel so uncomfortable. I do not want that. And both feelings are valid and both have a different approach. And I think that we should give personalized care,
Yeah.
and that everyone can find their own road. It's not one regiment for every person.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. Okay, now I am always greedy, greedy me. So, will HRT make it possible for me to have multiple orgasms?
Well, that's a good question. Well, there is this misunderstanding of men being able to have one orgasm and women multiple orgasms. Actually, for both men and women, for both trans men and trans women, for gender diverse people, you have an orgasm, and after that orgasm, your body has a refractory period. So a recovering period where you're not able to have an orgasm, and usually are also just not ready to continue having sex or just to pause, at least not to work immediately towards an orgasm. So a lot of people have sex, they orgasm, and they have a break. You can continue being sexually active in that time, but it takes some time before you can have an orgasm again. So actually the good news is everyone can have multiple orgasms if they give themselves the time to orgasm again, and if they have the desire to orgasm again. So there's also a lot of people for whom the orgasm was in an intensity that they think like, oh, I'm done for today, I'm gonna take a nap. So the stereotypical what you see in a movie, people having sex and the one person rolls over and goes to sleep. So it is about how intense your orgasm was, whether you want to continue or whether you want to sleep. But everyone is able to have
more than one
an orgasm after they've recovered again from that first orgasm. But if that time in between is very long, then so the experience from people on hormone therapy, again, it is based on just described experiences. Trans women do describe the orgasms being longer. They describe them maybe being not the same intensity for very short, but less intense, but for longer. And it could be that because of that you don't reach the highest peak, but a lower intensity, that it's also easier to recover and have a next orgasm. But that is, we don't have the science on that, or at least I'm not aware of the science on that yet.
Okay. And is it, do cis women get multiple orgasms in house?
For cis women, it is similar. There is cis women that have their orgasm and are happy that they're done. There's also cis women that have smaller orgasms multiple times. They don't reach that high peak. And I think the understanding about the orgasm and which type of stimulation, whether they recognize their orgasm, because sometimes women only find out later in life, cis women find out later in life, like, oh, wait, is this what an orgasm is? I thought that nice sensation was like, oh, it's nice, that's an orgasm. But they only realize later because the anatomy of the clitoris has been very much ignored in scientific life. I think it's only been 10 years ago that medical books started describing the anatomy of the clitoris, which is not just one dot, but is a whole constellation, so to say. Whereas the anatomy of the penis and the head of the penis and the sensitive part has been described for years and years and years. So I think for cis women, there's still a lot of exploration because they've been ignored in the medical sciences on orgasm and sexual life. And for trans women, it's similar. First of all, they're still very much doing their research on which type of surgeries are the most most enjoyed or the most popular or the most successful, depending on how you rate successfulness. Is successful surgery based on what it looks like, or is it based on how it functions, or is it based on how someone enjoys sex and orgasm afterwards? There's different ways of rating it, and I think both for trans women, trans feminine people, but also for cis women, the knowledge about their orgasms and sexual life has been very much lagging behind compared with researches on penises.
Yeah. So you mean to say everyone can have multiple orgasms, but we just need to work on it?
Well, of course, in the ideal world, yes. Of course, there's people that have maybe medical conditions that the nerves don't work properly anymore, or they have medical conditions that causes also to experience pain. For example, if someone has dryness of the vagina, for example, and you experience pain, it's very difficult to enjoy pleasure through stimulation, because at the same time of the activity you also experience pain. So you need to be able to take that pain away and the cause of the pain away, so that people can relax and focus on the pleasure. So I don't want to say that everyone is supposed to have orgasms, because sometimes there is medical conditions or psychological barriers that make it very difficult. There is sexologists throughout the world, but it depends on the region how openly it's talked about. But there's always ways of finding out. Is there, if you struggle with having orgasms, is there maybe a medical reason, or is there maybe a psychological reason, and is that something that we can work about? There's a reason why why sexology exists, because for a lot of people, the sexual component is something valid and important in their life, but for a long time it has been something that is too shameful to go to a doctor, and especially when you have to disclose, okay, but how do you have sex? Why is it not working? What could be the cause? It feels very personal, but the good news indeed is that there is options to improve your sexual life. There's options to hopefully improve your orgasm, and in the ideal setting, everyone gets multiple orgasms, maybe. But for those who don't, it's also not a problem. It's not a mandatory thing to enjoy your sexual life.
Yeah, sex is more of a full body experience.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, I have another question. Can HRT affect my libido and desire for sex?
Like I mentioned before, a lot of people report that their desire for sex goes down after they start with hormones. And we don't know yet whether that is because simply they don't have the reminder of an erection to tell them, like, oh, you're turned on. So the idea and thoughts about what desire means and how desire is built up, we do think that maybe at the time that you're starting with hormones, maybe your mindset is less with sex, and therefore you feel less like having sex, or maybe you're less comfortable with being intimate with someone. But there's not one proven fact of that your desire really goes down, or whether it's just because you have less erections that you think your desire goes down.
Okay, all right. Will HRT affect my ability to have penetrative sex?
That's a very good question. So if you imagine that, first of all, with HRT, people have less erections. To be able to penetrate and be active in that, you would need an erection. So if you don't have an erection, then it will be difficult. And the second part of it is that your erection needs to be hard enough. And if the erection doesn't become hard enough, then it can also be more difficult to penetrate. So, like, oh, I'm turned on, but it's more difficult to penetrate. People notice that. There is, of course, solutions. So for people that want that and for whom that is an important part, the easiest solution for a lot of people is to use any form of support. So that could be with a cock ring, for example. So that is something that makes sure that the circulation goes in, but it's less easy to go out. So therefore, it's easier to stay hard. It's also an option to find a better balance of hormones. So with people that report to me like, oh, I really struggle with having the sex in the way that I want, I always discuss with them like how does your ideal sex look like? We look at the medication and whether there's anything that we can adjust. And then you need to outweigh the pros and cons, because sometimes or a lot of times actually people say, well, I would like to have a better erection so I can penetrate, but I don't want to have less hormones because I love my skin, I love my hair, I love how my body changes. So it's not always just changing hormones. So sometimes help of a sexual device like a cock ring could help, but other options such as Viagra or other medications to support erections are also a possibility.
Okay. And what is a cock ring?
A good question. A cock ring is a ring of, it's made of silicone usually. And it's you have it in different elasticities, but it is something that you can put around the penis, so it's at the base of the penis. You can imagine it like the same material that a condom is made of, the same fact that at the bottom the condom also has this ring thing left. But basically just one big ring of that silicone that you put around the cock at the base of the penis. It will make happen, it sits quite tightly. And what it does is it still allows blood to go in the penis, but it blocks blood that wants to go out. So therefore you can imagine it's the same as with a balloon. Air that goes in but is not going out, it stays more in. So that's why there's more blood flow towards the penis, and people can keep an erection. It's important to realize that a cock ring is only helping with erections. It's not a something that prevents sexual transmitted diseases. So even though it might be the same material as a condom, it doesn't work that way. But it's something that can help with erections.
And the blood flow towards the penis can happen because the pressure in the arteries is a bit...
Yes, and that... So the veins is the ones that let the blood go away. They are more at the outside, and the arteries more in the inside. So you can imagine if something presses around it, the outside is compressed first. So that's how it...
Okay, interesting. That was an interesting thought. Cock ring. I never heard about it.
Yes. It's actually, I went to a conference recently where there was also, it was a conference on sexology, not just for trans people, but for cis people. There was a lot of trans topics as well. But there was a stand there of people that had a special device of a cock ring that also measures... it was like a smart cock ring. So it measures the amount of pressure and whether if someone has an erection and how hard the erection is. So it was actually used for older cisgender men. Like they get older, they have difficulty getting an erection, and they had this cock ring with that device to measure overnight. Do you still get nightly erections? How hard are they? Do you still have sex? And how hard is your penis? And we had a conversation like, this is actually a device. I mean, it's still very new and being discovered, but it's actually interesting on hormone therapy, how to use such a device to measure how erections change with hormone therapy, and whether it's still desired. So the fact that those things exist is... cock rings have existed, but a lot of people don't think about it when it comes to recommendations for trans people, because a lot of people don't dare to, like an endocrinologist doesn't always dare to talk about sexual activity, and especially when it comes to trans people talking about whether someone wants an erection, yes or no, that can be a topic that is very much ignored, whereas I think it's important to see the whole spectrum of possibilities and still look for solutions within that.
Yeah, and I think it's also considered as a fetishizing part of the sex, like all the devices and everything. And
Yes, and I think maybe that is also a difference in the Netherlands, where sexual activity and sexual devices are less stigmatized. So you can go to a regular pharmacy and they have a range of different sex articles. Therefore, so you can even go to certain grocery stores these days where they sell sexual devices. So there might be less of that stigma, but sexual devices are definitely not a fetish. They can be part of a fetish, and a fetish of someone is something that turns someone on, and as long as someone doesn't hurt themselves or someone else with it, there might not be that much harm, and as long as it doesn't become obsessive. But of course, it is the fact that certain devices are used for a fetish doesn't mean that their only purpose is for a fetish. So you can also use it for other purposes. Same as that maybe cis men that are getting older and struggle with erection might use a cock ring because they want to enjoy sex, but their anatomy doesn't allow at that age to have the erection as hard as they enjoy. It's the same for trans people that might still want to have an erection, but their hormones don't allow it. It doesn't become a fetish if it's not a fetish for you. It only becomes a fetish if something is a fetish for you.
Can HRT cause painful orgasms?
That's a good question. So the reason for orgasms to be painful can be for different reasons. It can be because of the change of the testes and the ligaments that might contract during orgasm. There are some contractions in your lower abdomen, and it could be that there is some changes both from the testes or from the penis that might be a bit more sensitive because the tissue is changing. It's not very common for people to have painful orgasms in that sense. Sometimes people report it, and that could be because of those anatomical changes. It could also be because it's more difficult to get an orgasm, so people need more time, need more pressure, need more energy. So actually it might feel more sensitive. So it's uncommon for orgasms to be more painful, but on the other hand, the body is also changing, and especially also with the sexual function and testes, things are changing. So if it happens, it's not a big alarm bell. If it remains after 1 or 2 years, then I would talk about it in the beginning stage and discuss whether there would be any reasons for concern. But if people didn't have a medical person to ask about it, then you would want to speak with someone. I wouldn't wait forever. But usually I would expect such things to normalize within the first months, ideally a year.
Okay, it is a very temporary thing if it happens.
If it happens because of anatomical changes, you can imagine the biggest changes are in the first 2 years. But especially the reduction of testes, for example, and the sperm production, and also ligaments, that would be within the first year. So if that would be the reason of why it's more painful, I would expect those changes to at some point have their new stable position and therefore not be irritated or painful anymore.
Okay, I have another question.
Sure.
Can HRT increase my risks of contracting STI?
A very good question. Your risk for STI is usually about how you have sex and who you have sex with. So if you imagine that the type of sex that you have might change because you start liking new things or new activities. So the risk for STIs, especially if you start on hormone therapy, I wouldn't expect it to change a lot for trans women and trans feminine people. Because if your sexual activities and your sexual partners don't change like before, you wouldn't expect your tissue to change either. There is no significant change of your, for example, the penis skin doesn't change significantly. The only change is that it becomes more difficult to get an erection, and that it might be more difficult to penetrate. So it might be less likely that you get a sexual transmittable disease of the penis. Anal sex, if people have anal sex, that can still happen because there's not much changing there. And the same with oral sex. You can't, there's no major changes of the oral mucosa. So it's all about the type of sex you have. And it's good to know that for people that use the feminizing hormones, there's not that many things that increase. It's more the surroundings of how you're treated by the environment or what kind of people want to have sex with you that might put you at risk for sexual transmitted diseases. So what a lot of trans women report is that they're more sexualized, that they're more fetishized sometimes, but also that they're more often victims of sexual harassment, verbal harassment, but also physical harassment. So those type of activities, of course, put you at risk of getting sexual transmitted diseases just by having sex forced upon you and not being able to make the decisions that are good for you in regards to protecting yourself.
Okay. Yeah.
And for example, with trans men who use testosterone, there we do see that there's a change of the mucosa and that for them there is a slight increase of sexual risk. But for trans women, trans feminine people, there's no risk in the mucosa, but there's more the risk of how environment might be sexually unsafe for you.
Okay. It's more of the social environment.
Yes.
Makes it changes. Yeah. All right.
I think that's also why it's so important to make people comfortable to also talk about sex, because we know that a lot of people are in a vulnerable situation where maybe hormones can be expensive. You might be getting very dependent on other people to accept you, and that might cause you to make choices that aren't the best in your interest, but that you just do for safety. So whether it comes to people being in unsafe relationships, or sometimes people going over their own sexual boundaries, or being exploited, or doing sex work to be able to afford certain procedures, all those kind of things are like, I never judge people about it because it's not something that a lot of people choose for themselves, but that the environment and the society has chosen for them. So make people aware of, okay, what can you do to protect yourself for just being sexually active? Like what kind of sexual protective measures exist? And how can you protect yourself also in dangerous situations or in situations where you have more risks? And whether that is with sex work or within a relationship that is unhealthy, or because you're exploring and you're not always prepared of what other people expect from you. Those kind of recommendations are always good to discuss. How can you keep yourself safe? Not because transition makes you more vulnerable, but society makes you more vulnerable to sexually transmitted infections.
And other than the usual routes of protection, like condoms, what are the other forms of protections that can keep you safe?
Yes, it depends on each country what is available. Of course, condoms are the most known form of protective measures. Using enough lubrication with sex decreases the amount of tears or wounds or risks. A lot of countries offer vaccinations, for example, to vaccinations for infections that could be sexually transmittable, such as hepatitis B. then there might be possibilities to get free STD checks, where you can get tested for chlamydia, gonorrhea, hepatitis, or HIV. And with those free tests, you at least get the security of like, okay, what I've done so far, did I get an STI? Do I need treatment for an STI? So that makes you safer. In some countries, we now have the availability of PrEP. PrEP is short for pre-exposure prophylaxis, and that is a pill that you can take to prevent getting HIV. So that is something that is growing a lot, where there's a lot of attention, because of course HIV nowadays has very good treatment for HIV, but we still know that we can't cure HIV. With the good treatment, people can grow old, and it's known as a chronic disease, but a lot of times people still suffer the stigma of HIV and all the hospital visits and what happens if you don't have access to your medication. So preventing HIV is a big new development in the past 5 years, so to say. So those are, I think, the most important ones, and especially when the availability is limited, then the use of condoms, the use of good lubrication, and trying to get tested somewhere on a basis as much as is possible. And another thing that is good to know, that if people have HIV and they are on treatment, it's nowadays, with the treatment that exists, it is almost impossible to transmit once you're on treatment. So the only moment that people can infect someone with HIV is when they're not on treatment for HIV. And that's why it's important to get tested, because if you get tested and you find out that you, for example, have HIV, then you can get on treatment, and it's not nice to have a daily tablet, but you have a chronic condition and you know you won't infect someone else. And if you don't have HIV, it also prevents the spread, because you can disclose, oh, I've got myself tested. So those are the more important ones. And if PrEP is available, I think for a lot of people that can be a good measure to protect themselves, especially if they're in circumstances where they can't always safely make the decisions that are best for themselves.
Yeah, I'd like to add some things here, especially India-specific context. So in India, as you said, there are vaccinations available for hepatitis B. It would cost around 100 rupees per shot. You can go to any hospital, talk to the doctor, tell them that you need hepatitis B vaccination, and it will cost you 100 rupees per shot, which is like €1. And for testing, you can go to, there's something called a CCC in every locality, and there you get free STD testing. And the STDs tested there are HIV, syphilis, and Hep B, hepatitis B. So 3 HIV STIs tested for free. And there is also HPV vaccinations available in India, but they're not free. They're a bit more expensive. There is a 4 variant one which will cost around 4,500 rupees, and there is a 9 variant. HPV has a lot of variants, and each variant causes a different kind of disease. So yeah, there is a 9 variant one which will cost quite a lot more, which is like 11 to 13,000 rupees, I guess. And about PrEP. PrEP is also available for affordable price in India, and with certain organizations like I know Color Positive and some other organizations. We'll put the numbers and contacts below in this video, and it will cost around 400 to 700 rupees a month for PrEP. And is there also a post-exposure prophylaxis?
Yes, PEP. So PrEP is pre-exposure. So that means before you get exposed to HIV. So you want to prevent it. That is the PrEP that you just mentioned. And indeed, what is also available is post-PEP, post-exposure. So after the event, so let's say you were a victim of sexual harassment, for example, and were at risk of getting STDs, if you get treatment with the same medication or with similar medication, within ideally 48 hours, ideally as quick as possible, but sometimes up to 72 hours, it can prevent you getting the virus in a lot of cases. So that is good to know, that if you ever had a situation where the condom broke or anything else happened where you later thought, or maybe you were intoxicated and your decisions, it's not always about harassment. Sometimes life happens. There is still options to go to a clinic to ask for PrEP. I would expect that would be the same place where you also get PrEP in India.
And how does the protection work in PrEP? How often do you have to take it, and when are you protected?
So there is 2 ways of taking PrEP. PrEP is 1 pill, and you can either take 1 pill daily, and then you're always protected, so to say. So that is the easiest. When you start PrEP, it is important that you first do a test, an HIV test, to make sure that you don't have it. Because of course, if you start taking medication to prevent it, but you already have it, that is not good. But the organizations that provide PrEP would always guide you with that. So the one option is taking it every day. It becomes fully effective, I think, after 5 days. And the other option is that you only take it around situations where you know you're going to be sexually active. So if you're someone that doesn't have sex that much, let's say you only have sex twice a month, and you feel like, well, if I only have twice a month, I go to a specific party or I meet with this specific friend who's visiting, then for some people it feels like a burden to take a tablet every day for something that is occasional. In those situations, you can take intermittent PrEP. That means you take 2 tablets 2 hours before you're having sex, and then 24 hours after you take 1 tablet, and 24 hours after you take 1 tablet. So that is 4 tablets in total. 2 tablets 2 hours before, 1 day after, 2 days after. So, and that also gives the same protection for HIV.
Okay.
It's important to know that PrEP protects you from HIV. The hepatitis B vaccination can protect you for hepatitis B. But PrEP doesn't protect you for hepatitis B, and PrEP doesn't protect you for syphilis or other sexually transmitted infections. So the most important reason why people take it is because they know that syphilis, for example, you can treat with antibiotics. Other sexually transmitted infections like chlamydia or gonorrhea, you can also treat with antibiotics. But HIV, is a lifelong infection as we know it. So that's why they say that's more important to prevent, because we can't cure it, whereas the other ones you could get a treatment for.
So I have one last question for you.
Sure.
Can HRT change my gender identity or my sexual orientation?
So your gender identity, a lot of people start HRT because of their gender identity. But what is good to know is that a lot of people have something in mind of what they hope to get out of HRT. So they hope, the effects of hormones, this is the end goal that I have, for example. But we do see that a lot of times people still find their ways of what for them feels right, what for them the end goal is. Does that mean your gender identity changes because of the hormones? I don't think that might be per se the direct influence, but it could be that you still are looking for the freedom to find yourself and understand yourself. So sometimes I do see people that initially came to me saying, "Oh, I identify as trans woman," but then over the course of time they say, "Oh, I'm more non-binary, trans feminine, but I said I was trans woman because I was afraid otherwise I wouldn't get hormones." Or sometimes people say, "Well, I don't know how to define myself for now, let's say non-binary, but I do want to start hormones." And then a couple months they say, "Oh, this feels so right, I want to go a step further." And then at some point they say, "Actually, I identify as trans woman." So I think identity is for some people a journey. It is also not something that is solidified, like, oh, it's one thing. It can be still like path of life that still can change. So I don't think hormones themselves change gender identity. I think gender identity is not that solid. So if there are still shifts and things to explore, then they might come on your path. And for some people, it is very solid. They know from the day they were born and every step throughout their transition, nothing changes in how they identify. But sometimes people, especially when it's more on the fluid or non-binary spectrum, are still searching in that aspect, and that is perfectly fine. When it comes to sexual attraction, that is actually very interesting, because the same as that hormones have effect on your sexual functioning, which is anatomy or which is body, which is functioning, they also have an effect on the emotions, so also on the sexual emotions. So we do see again that people sometimes change the type of activities that they like, the type of sensations, the type of way that they like to be touched, but also the type of thing that turns them on can change. So that means that they get interested in different sexual activities, but also they might be interested in a different sexual partner or be turned on by different things. People that are already in a relationship, when they come for a consultation with me, I always explain to them, like, oh, there is changes in what you enjoy sexually, but also what you're attracted to sexually. So be open about that, make that an exploration together, so that this journey also doesn't become like, oh, I feel different now and I don't get turned on by this, but we've been doing this for so many years, we can't talk about this now. That can cause a big barrier in a relationship. Whereas if you make it like, oh, I start feeling something new, can we try this? Then transition can become a nice exploration together on a sexual level as well. But of course, it becomes difficult that if you've been with a partner, but you become less attracted to that partner and more attracted into a different type of partner, whether that is more masculine or more feminine, or maybe it has nothing to do with masculinity and femininity. We don't know whether that is purely linked to just getting HRT. We know that it happens and people describe it. Whether that is because of finding this new freedom and therefore starting to think about these different steps in your life, that is a possibility. But there might still be, as I mentioned, a lot of research needed to be done to really find it out. But to know, like, especially enjoying new sexual activities, maybe new sexual sensations, sometimes also being attracted to different sexual partners that could be or a different type than you usually fell for. That could be a possibility, and as long as you're open and interested in that, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, I think the key is to be open to new changes and possibilities.
Yes. Yeah. I think when it comes to puberty, because a lot of times people expect, oh, when I start with my transition, things will start to make sense. Whereas if we've had our puberty already before, we know that actually puberty is quite a confusing time. Some things start making sense, but there's a lot of things that don't make sense. And when you start with hormone replacement therapy, which is basically a new puberty.
Second puberty, they call it.
it's not suddenly all going to make sense. There's going to be a lot of things that you are realizing that you never thought about and that you're going to be very happy about. There's a lot of things that you maybe didn't expect or maybe did expect and they're not going to happen, and the ones that you didn't expect are going to happen. But there's also a lot of things that you still don't know the answer to at the end, because we're also still humans and we don't know all the answers. So it's a process, it takes time, and it's a journey, and it might not be a journey with a end goal, but a journey that has a lot of things where you feel like, okay, after 5 years, your desires in regards to hormones and transition might still be shifting and changing. And for a lot of people, maybe after 2 years already, they have done all the steps that they are happy with. Transition can be very different for many people.
Yeah. It's a confusing journey for a lot of people. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Camiel, for answering all our questions, especially about a topic that we in India shy a lot about to talk. So thank you very much for coming on our show and helping us with a lot of questions.
Yes, you're welcome. And you're more than welcome to invite me again if there's more topics that come up after this.
Oh, are you sure?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you very much for watching us, and see you next time. Choo.